Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, mein Damen und Herren, willkommen to another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a seasoned comic book professional of many decades, all about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And I'll tell you, hats off to Reed Nitz. He sent me a question the old fashioned way through the mail. He sent me this really cool, I assume, custom Christmas card featuring amalgam characters. I don't know if this is custom or this is something that was actually sent out back in the day. But it's very, very cool. Anyway, he wishes me a Merry Christmas. Thank you very much, Reed. Same to you. And he asks, P.S., what was it like working with Russ Heath? Russ Heath, legendary comic book artist, definitely in the top 5 of my favorite comic book artists of all time. I got to work with this guy, and he was a guy I very much idolized as a comic fan. I consider Russ Heath's Sergeant Rock comics of the early 70s to be the pinnacle of American comic books. You cannot find a better comic book produced in this country than Heath's early 70s DC war stuff. Storytelling, detail, emotional weight, many of the stories that he wrote himself. Others were written by Robert Kanigher, also at the top of his form in the early 70s at DC. And but then I ended up getting to work with him. My earliest experience working with Russ, writing he illustrated a script I wrote for Moon Knight #4, Mark Spector Moon Knight #4. Russ did a fill-in job, did the cover as well as the interiors, and I think Carl Potts, based on my visceral reaction to Carl saying, I'm thinking of having Russ Heath do a fill-in. I think Carl spread the word throughout Marvel that I loved Russ Heath's work and would work with him anytime. And this led directly to working with Russ on an issue of the Nom. And I remember talking to Don Daly about this, and Don was a little reticent to work with Russ because he felt that Russ was getting to the point in his career where he wasn't that interested in the stuff. He was more interested in the payday at the end of it than in the work itself. And he felt he couldn't get Russ excited enough about this job for Russ to do his best work. And I said, well, have you talked to him? Have you done anything to try to, and Don's like, no, I just assign the stuff, and, the artist is supposed to bring their own level of enthusiasm or lack of enthusiasm. And I said, well, why don't you tell him to paint the cover the way they used to do the painted covers at DC, where they would, use a more, a painterly approach to the war covers. Because Russ did a lot of them. He did a lot of covers that used, various subtle tones. They were more muted. And he did that on Sea Devils as well, using a lot of gray tone and stuff like that. And Don did that. He said, why don't you do this like one of your old GI Combat covers? And he said Russ got pretty interested, and this was the result. And it's a terrific cover, and it's a great issue. Russ really applied himself to the story. And it was, this story was the first time that I got to talk to Russ, because Don told me Russ has some questions, reference questions to weaponry and things like that. And it took me 3 days to work up the courage to call Mr. Heath. And, he was nice enough on the phone. Not as friendly as the time I talked to John Severn. But, got along okay. And I worked with him several other times on other stuff, Punisher projects. I sadly wrote his last Haunted Tank story. Um, so we worked together a number of times, and each time he either was pretending he didn't remember me or just playing a joke on me. And Russ had a reputation as a really, really cruel practical joker. So he had kind of a dry and mean sense of humor. It's not to say that Russ wasn't a nice guy or anything else, but he just couldn't resist a joke at someone else's expense. So each time I worked with him, and it was many times I worked with him, he would always act like he didn't remember the last time we worked together. Like we were meeting for the first time, and we did meet in person a number of times. But I think it was all a joke because in the end, toward the end of his life, when he was selling off artwork and things like that, he contacted me and through another person and said there was a number of things we had worked on together, and was I interested in having first dibs on that artwork when he was selling off the bulk of his originals. Heath was a guy who didn't sell a lot of originals, didn't give away a lot of originals throughout his career, and so he had, an enormous collection of original artwork. And I thought that was very nice of him to, offer me a shot at buying originals directly from him. Now, if you don't know Russ Heath's work, as I said, famous for his work in the DC War titles, which he was there for decades. I worked at Atlas as well, doing war comics. And I think one of the reasons, other than the fact that Russ is, Russ was just an amazing draftsman, terrific storyteller, and all it was that he was interested in making the stuff as historically accurate as possible, more so than any other than John Severin. Most war guys were like, close enough. But Russ had to do it exactly, just like John Severin. Had the right number of buttons on the tunic. The web belts had to look just right. Was this weapon still in use during this period? Russ was a real history nut and would travel anywhere he could to take actual photographs of military equipment. Remember him telling me, just sounded like a little kid, that he had visited France and someone had taken him to where there was a Tiger tank still rusting away in a field. And Russ said he used up, rolls of film taking the pictures of this tank from every conceivable angle. Aside from his insistence that things be historically accurate, doing the homework, something I do, and I respect it when an artist does it, he also basically worked in my favorite genres, war comics, horror comics, and westerns. And he had an affinity for all of them, drew them all realistically, and again doing that homework. But he had a very varied career, and he did a lot of work for National Lampoon, things like Cowgirls at War and stuff like that. I remember a hysterical piece that he did for a supposed pamphlet about the combat buses of World War II, where city buses were converted into armored vehicles. He did a terrific painting for that. But guy with a great sense of humor as well, which he put to use working on Little Annie Fanny. He was on Little Annie Fanny for a little while, which put him in contact with the whole Playboy organization. And as Russ told me in a series, we got to spend a lot of time together in his later years. At one point, he visited CrossGen and basically spent 3 days there with me, and just telling me story after story after story. Very few of them having anything to do with comics. Very detailed, very funny stories about practical jokes he had played on fellow artists. As I said, some of them were quite cruel. But also stories about working for Playboy and at Playboy. Most legendary of all of these was the 6 months that he spent living at the Playboy Mansion in Chicago, apparently he showed up there for a party and decided he didn't want to leave. So just kind of moved into one of the many, many rooms in the mansion until Hefner discovered him living there and threw him out. But he told a lot of stories about his adventures working for Playboy and working for the companies, and the fun he had at other people's expense. uh, he also tried to act with me like he was just the I'm just a pro. It was a job to us. We weren't comic book fans. You know, we stopped work at 5 and went home or went to the bar. To which I said, "That's a load of crap, Russ." He says, "What do you mean?" And I had lots of Russ Heath comic books in my office at CrossJet on a comic rack, and I pulled off just one at random, and I said, it was this incredibly detailed cover, um, featuring a soldier thrusting a bayonet at the reader. And I said, this is not the work of a guy who just quit at 5. And he said, yeah, you're right. He says, I worked a lot harder on these than I was being paid to do. So there was a passion there, as well as the massive talent of Mr. Russ Heath. So that's what it was like working with him. It had its ups and downs and everything else, but I enjoyed every minute of it, as intimidating as he could be. Not to say he was a grump or a grouch. He was just, first of all, it starts out, with me idolizing him. That puts me in a bad bargaining place. and then his need to yank everybody's chain all the time. Oh man, what an awesome guy! What an awesome talent. Rex Moss. Question: Alpha Core 1 is out. How do you tend to react to reviews? What is the best part about your job other than getting paid? How do I react to reviews? I don't know how to take a compliment. The reviews have been really good. People are really enjoying it. Going on YouTube and raving about it, going on various websites and raving about it. So I'm just relieved that people are digging it. I'm new to this universe, not new to comics, obviously, but new to this universe. And, you never know how something's going to go over. But I've apparently been welcomed in with open arms. So that's all real cool. As far as what's the best part next to making money, actually making money for me has always been more of a necessity than a desire. When you want to do something creative, if it's painting or writing or sculpting or whatever it is you want to do, if you want to do it professionally, you got to get paid. And the reason why you got to get paid is so you can do it full time. You don't want to be doing your artwork living on a park bench. You've got to, in my case, support a family, pay the bills. Otherwise, you got to go get a real job, which would be a nightmare for me at this point. So making money makes the best part of the job possible. And the best part of the job for me is sitting alone in a room making stuff up, just letting my imagination fly, just creating worlds in my head and populating them with people that I learn to like or dislike, and just basically being the god of this parallel world that I create in my head. And the fact that people like it and the fact that I get paid to do it are secondary to just being alone in that room. And Denny O'Neil told me that once. That he said that, what separated the wannabes from the lifers in the writing business was, did they enjoy sitting alone in a room making stuff up. And if you dug that, then you were going to have a long career. If you were in it for the money or the fame or the good reviews or the accolades, you were not going to last long. So that's why I've always been kind of an invisible hand writer. I've never been out there promoting myself, or anything else, because none of that interests me. As long as I'm making enough cash that I can look across the dinner table and look my family in the eyes, that I'm not just sitting in the room doing nothing. I'm not just sitting in the room wasting time, indulging myself. I'm actually involved in a lucrative process that allows me to continue making stuff up. And that really is the biggest joy for me. So money's money. Ask a big lottery winner how much happiness that money brought them if they're still alive a year after they win. Ashton Batiste reached out. Hey Chuck, I wanted to know, when writing Nightwing, what was the most important thing to get right? Well, the same thing that I had to get right on Alpha Core, which is not to fail the fans, the many, many fans of Nightwing. Nightwing had never had his own title. He was by far the most popular character at DC who had never had a title. And so there was a lot of anticipation that this book be good. I took it over after Denny O'Neil and Alan Grant, who were going to co-write it, decided for whatever reasons they didn't want to do the book. And it was offered to me. And all I knew about it was Scott Peterson told me that I had to create a new city. And Scott McDaniel was my artist. And Mr. Peterson wanted a Jackie Chan movie every issue. With Scott McDaniel on board, that was no problem. And I just sort of attacked it. I just didn't want to screw it up. So I put a lot of sweat into it, did a lot of writing. I basically just concentrated on this title for a few months. Wrote nothing else but Nightwing. In the end, I think I had all the first 12 issues done when Scott McDaniel had either not yet started issue 1 or was in the middle of writing issue 1. And I handed in the script for issue 12. And this allowed Scott Peterson and I to go back and forth and make sure it told, a long, cohesive story, because I wanted a year-long story with a beginning, middle, and end, like a big old saga. And if you read the first 2 trades, you can see what we were doing. Because this was in a day when the edict came down to start thinking about the trade paperbacks when you're writing. And so I did that. And it paid off. Readers really dug it, which made me happy. And I got to work with Scott McDaniel for quite a long time, which made me even happier. And, I think I largely succeeded, because a lot of people tell me of all the things I've written, it's their favorite. So it was worth putting that extra sweat in. But trust me, like I said, I was just making stuff up. So it's never a job to me. It's never work. Sometimes it's more challenging than others, but sometimes the pressure's on more than others. But, I love my work. Hey, if you haven't subscribed, do so. If you have subscribed, thank you. It helps enormously to grow this channel, and you people have been delivering, and the channel is growing. Next question, Joshua Ignatowski. What kinds of movies and or shows do you think Brian Salari uses his Getflix accounts to watch? Brian Salari is, of course, the superhero character in the Alpha Core. He's kind of the head of the Alpha Core. And he mentioned in passing his Getflix account. So I think we all know what I was referring to. I think Brian would watch a lot of John Wayne movies, which probably means he's actually watching the movies on Amazon Prime. I don't think Netflix has any John Wayne movies. But that would be, as a Texan and an ex-military guy and a real man, he'd watch The Duke. So, but okay, another one from Joshua. Do you think the Getflix service is overloaded with too many series that follow the formula of somebody going back to his hometown and finding out everyone there is actually a psycho. Yes, that seems to be the trope that Netflix. I mean, if you want to pitch to Netflix, the formula is simple, and it is a formula. An ex-doctor, an ex-cop, a former spy, whatever. They retire, they quit, or they're thrown out under, dishonorable circumstances, and they go back to their hometown, their always picturesque hometown, to basically recover and restore themselves, back to their roots. And invariably, they find out that the place that they were born in and grew up in is just a hotbed of deceit and perversity and murder and everything else. It's like the town they knew, it was a lie. And so they uncover all the deep, dark secrets of their town because they can't stop being a cop, a doctor, an ex-spy, whatever. And it's like, my God, could you think of another storyline? And if you watch, it seems to be a specialty at Netflix. I mean, you see these stories elsewhere. This really seems to be a thing at Netflix where they are just hot for that kind of story. And they got the numbers. Maybe they have proof, like Hallmark knows you don't stray too far from the Christmas movie formula. Netflix knows, hey, if you do this kind of thing, you've got a 80% chance of going to a second or third season with it. Because our viewers like watching the same story over and over and over again. So there you have it. There's the story of Netflix. Joshua Ignatowski, again, will we be seeing where other excepts rank on the Shuster scale in more Rippaverse comics down the road? Now, this is always the danger of mentioning something in passing in a comic. I wanted to imply that there was a scale, scientific scale for measuring the superpowers of a character in the Rippaverse. And I thought, well, why not name it after one of Superman's creators? So the Shuster scale is the one they use, much like the Scoville scale for hot foods or the Richter scale for earthquakes. And so, just mention it in passing. Denny O'Neil once bemoaned the fact that he had a Batman story in which he had to name several gang leaders. It's just in a passing thing in dialogue, like, yeah, we arrested this one or that one or that one. And so he lists a bunch of gang leaders, and one of them is Maxie Zeus. And other writers saw that name and created a Maxie Zeus character. And Denny's like, I never intended for that character to be any more but mentioned once in a line of dialogue. So you never know. You never know where this stuff will go. But yeah, we will see other characters now that it's part of the canon. And I guess we'll have to more fully explain what the Shuster scale is and how it's implemented, how the numbers and stats are determined. I assume when we get to role-playing games and things like that, the Shuster scale will come into play in a big, big way. Hamilton Blues lovers. TV seems to be following the same pattern as comics, from one and done to longer stories. Do you think this will harm TV as it did comics? I guess it is harming TV because all of the studios and production houses bet big on streaming and apparently reached capacity or went over capacity, oversaturation, and there's too much out there. And so a lot of these series that are one continuing story have sort of not reached the point where they could have a second season. But apparently all across television, this is what we're seeing, is each season is an epic saga ending on a cliffhanger. Of course, it's been this way for a while. I remember watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it was a continuing story. I think really, I guess The Fugitive was one of the first on TV to have, but each episode was done in one part of a larger saga. The other one I can remember is Crime Story, in the 80s. The Michael Mann produced series set in Chicago in the 1960s. It had a continuing story. Wise Guy as well had a continuing story where it was the same villain, the same bad guy for the entire season or half the season. So sort of been heading this way. And because of viewing habits are different, we've all binged. We've all gotten involved in something like Squid Games or Ozarks. Well, I couldn't watch Ozarks after the first season, but you know, things like that. The Sopranos as well, where you just watch, you know, episode after episode till you're done. It's like compulsively reading a novel late into the night. Will it hurt TV? No, it's just the way we watch TV now. Just a change in habits. So, you know, what are you going to do? It did ruin comics, though. It did ruin comics. Kian Kurji, as an editor, how would you deal with an artist who can't stick to deadlines? Both Marvel and DC have had this problem with good artists such as Jim Lee and Gary Frank. Show some sympathy or fire them immediately. It is, after all, a business at the end of the day. Good luck firing Jim Lee. Some artists are good at handling the deadline, and some aren't. Writers as well. Deadlines don't bother me. I blow past them. If you tell me that issue 1 is due the 15th of next month, I'll probably be handing in issues 1, 2, 3, and 4 well before the 15th of next month, because I want to get ahead of that deadline. I don't like deadline. I'm the kid who first day of Christmas break did his homework assignment, so I didn't have to think about it again. Yeah, I know you all hate me. So, you know, deadlines are tough, but they're a reality in this business. A lot relies on you handing that art in on time. First of all, one of the things that it relies on is the other people on your creative team. If you're late with your art, you make the inker run late, the colorist run late, and the letterer run late. And they're not given the time they need to do their job properly. And that's just not right, because you're messing with other freelancers. Now, back in the 90s, DC invited me and Klaus Janson, legendary artist Klaus Janson, to come give a talk to the editorial staff at DC about the life of a freelancer. What was it like to be a freelancer? So the idea being that the editors would be like more understanding or something like that. But neither Klaus nor I were interested in getting anybody's sympathy or them learning about our lifestyles or whatever. We were mostly interested in letting them know the frustrations of being a freelancer. And our frustrations were not with the editors. They were with our fellow freelancers. And the biggest complaint Klaus and I had was freelancers who don't do their work on time, who mess up the whole system by not applying themselves, by not being there. And I remember getting into a big argument at that meeting. It was supposed to be us giving a talk, but there was a lot of back and forth. An argument that I think Paul Levitz had to break up between Andy Helfer and me on the subject of Jorge Zafino. And Helfer said, well, Chuck, you're a big proponent of Jorge Zafino, and he can't meet a monthly deadline. And my answer was, well, you should never give Jorge a monthly deadline. There's lots of artists like Jorge Zafino who can't do their best work under that kind of pressure. They simply can't produce a page a day, which is what you have to do to be a monthly guy. I said, you know, him and a whole bunch of other artists who are very, very good should be given event books, you know, single assignments, at most like a 3-part arc, scheduled way in advance. You give them a 3-part arc and you give them 6 months to do it. You know, but I said, what you guys do is you'll give monthly assignments to artists that you know will never meet the monthly deadline. They'll never meet it. You just have totally unrealistic expectations. And you do this because it's going to be go into the solicits to the comic shops that, Joe Fan Favorite is going to be doing a 4-issue arc on Green Lantern. And the retailer's like, woo, and they order a whole bunch of copies of that. Well, chances are those 4 issues won't be in a row because you've given the assignment to a guy who simply is, for whatever reason, incapable of meeting a monthly deadline. And both Klaus and I said, look, you got to think about that. Everybody's got a track record, and you've got to think about that. You got to hire people that know how to use a calendar. And then you got to ride them. And every editor, I know from talking to editors that every editor had stories about artists or writers. They basically had to babysit. They had to hold their hand, and make sure that they were working, even to the point of visiting them and making sure they were working. 2 people I know, an editor and artist, I won't give their names. The editor literally found the artist out on the ledge of the building that he worked in, hiding from him. Basically had to chase him around the ledge of the building and get him back inside. So, and I've heard the craziest excuses for missing deadlines. An artist infamously basically beat himself up to claim that he was mugged and his portfolio was stolen from him. So the dog ate my homework kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to do a monthly, you got to do the monthly. You got to be able to hack it. You got to be able to do it. It's important, or was. Hamilton Blues Lovers, again, you seem to like a lot of crime, action, adventure stuff. Is there anything that's strictly drama in any medium that you like? Mad Men, Kirby romance comics, etc. Well, the best romance comics ever produced in this country were from a company called St. John's. And I think St. John's just decided to go out of business when the Comics Code was introduced. But they did a series of extremely successful romance comics. And they're interesting to read, not just for the fact that many of them feature amazing artwork by Matt Baker, but that they're more adult. And I don't mean adult in like prurient material or risque material. I mean, they're more adult in their approach to the romance story. That it's not all just, giddy teenage stuff. There's like consequences. A lot of these stories are written like as almost as cautionary tales for girls. Like, don't fall for the wrong kind of guy, and they're well written and believable, and they're obviously written by somebody who understood human relationships. Because they ring true, they feel right, and they're not soap opera, they're not real melodramatic. They just seem like slice of life stories about guys and gals and how they either do or do not get along. And interesting stuff. And of course, as I said, almost always beautifully illustrated by Matt Baker and others. As far as straight drama, Glengarry Glen Ross is probably my favorite straight up drama. And, for a lot of reasons. Mamet's writing handed over to a cast that it is hard to imagine a better cast for a movie like this. Al Pacino, Jack Lemmon, Ed Harris, Alan Arkin, Kevin Spacey, Jonathan Pryce. Just a terrific ensemble and, brilliant dialogue delivered well, suspenseful story, but without any kind of actual real physical contact or conflict. It's all carried along by the being drawn into the world of these guys who are basically selling real estate investments, that we kind of suspect are worthless, but we kind of suspect there's a borderline criminality going on here, or at the very least, fraudulent advertising. But it's an excellent, excellent movie that, once you start watching it, you're just drawn in to the lives of these men desperately doing anything they can to try to sell these properties to people who oftentimes don't have the money or are not interested. Another one is a movie called Margin Call. Margin Call is the story, without naming the company, of the collapse of Lehman Brothers, one of the biggest investment firms in the world at the time, and what happened to it during the mortgage crisis of 2008, 2009, when many of the investment houses had to be bailed out by the government. Lehman Brothers was one of the first to fall. It fell before the bailouts because it was so over leveraged. And this is an amazing story. It's well cast. Once again, Kevin Spacey, Demi Moore, Jeremy Irons, Stanley Tucci, standout role in this movie. And what's amazing about the movie is it's a suspense thriller in which there's no fist fights, no one fires a gun, there's no car chases, it's all dialogue, it's all presentation. And the amazing thing is, it works up an edge of your seat thriller type excitement, like of a Mission Impossible movie, about a subject that most of us don't know much about. The incredible thing about the movie is it doesn't really tell us a whole lot about what's going on. It's very obscure why this investment firm is in so much trouble, what catastrophe is bearing down on them. But the writers who put this together are so skilled that they put it across anyway. They put across the urgency, and of course the actors help as well, the urgency. We don't know what the MacGuffin is. We don't know what's in the box. It doesn't matter. They bring across this urgency, and they were drawn into it. Just like Glengarry Glen Ross, we're drawn into their world, and we share their horror and fear and devastation of this awful, awful thing that is happening to their company and ultimately their livelihoods and their lives. And it's just brilliantly, brilliantly done. I've watched it many, many times, and I urge you, if you have never seen it, it's called Margin Call, to check it out. It's a fantastic piece of filmmaking. I say Glengarry Glen Ross, my favorite drama of all time. I'm gonna amend that. The Caine Mutiny is another straight up drama. It's a thriller, lots of suspense, but again, no car chases, no fighting, no nothing. And it's probably the most grown-up movie I've ever seen. I think I first saw it when I was like 14 or 15 years old, and it just sort of blew me away. And it still blows me away today. I watched it like a month ago, rewatched it for the umpteenth time. Absolutely brilliant movie. If you've heard of it and you think you know the story, you really don't. You've got to see the movie to see the story. And there's so many dramatic elements coming together in this movie at one time. And once again, gifted with a stellar cast. Humphrey Bogart famously as Captain Queeg, Fred McMurray, Van Johnson, Jose Ferrer steals the whole freaking movie from all of them. And you know the basic story. Humphrey Bogart takes over the captaincy of the Caine. It's during World War II. And he is either unfit or is the victim of a conspiracy by his crew. And it's a movie that makes your moral compass spin. It's a movie that makes you keep changing your mind about the characters as things are brought out, as different characters' perspectives are brought to bear on the story. And you're like, whoa, boy, what I thought before, really, maybe that's not true. Maybe that's not true. Maybe this guy's not a good guy. Maybe he's really a creep. Maybe this guy that I thought was, a creep is actually a really, really sympathetic character. Maybe he's the victim here. Just an amazing, amazing drama. So there you go. Kenny Todd, I was wondering if you think CGC and eBay has been a detriment to comic collecting. Seems like that and CGC have caused a lot of creators to charge for autographs, and sealing up a comic doesn't make much sense. Yeah, the CGC thing, I've signed books for CGC as a disclaimer, or not a disclaimer, but just to reveal to you the business end for me on CGC. I make a decent amount of money each year signing stuff that is then slabbed and then sold off into the collector market. That's the only time I charge for signatures. I don't charge for signatures. If you see me at a convention, if I'm making a personal appearance at a store or whatever, I've never charged for autographs. I can't do it. Jack Kirby never charged me, so I can't look a fan in the face and say, hey, that'll be $5 for me to just sign a comic. Because I don't think, for the most part, signing a comic increases its value. Look at all the comics that Stan Lee signed. He signed so many that he pretty much made Stan Lee comics worthless, even though people would pay a fortune for him to sign them. What I really think was going on was they were paying a fortune to meet him. Signing them was an excuse. Now, I think CGC comes along as a reaction to what happened with eBay, because eBay kind of revealed something about comics, that all these comics that we thought were very, very scarce, turns out they weren't. If you wanted an Amazing Fantasy 15, at any given time on eBay, there's hundreds of them available at various prices. And I think that caused a correction, particularly in the early 2000s, which was a great time to buy comic book back issues, because comic book back issue dealers were kind of stuck with inventory they couldn't move anymore because they were in competition with eBay. But the thing is, in the 80s, there were books you could pick up for $1, $2, and all of a sudden in the late 90s, they had rocketed up in price into the hundreds. I bought a book for literally 1985. I bought an issue of GI Combat for $1.75. It was in the War Comics bin. That issue today would cost you $2,000-$3,000 in the condition that I have it in. That's nuts. That's just crazy. But eBay, revealed a lot of that. So, convention sales, things like that, these guys had to drop their prices. And I think CGC was like, well, okay, maybe the comics aren't as collectible. We got to come up with a gimmick to make them seem more collectible. We're going to concentrate on condition and all the rest of it. And I think it is crazy to have a comic sealed that you can't read. I want to buy it. I want to read it. And I'm not going to pay a fortune. I'm not going to pay $150 for this comic because I just want to read it. And the only way to ever read this comic is to buy a back issue. When I bought this back issue, I might have paid $15 for it. And that was in the early 2000s. So, and the thing is, on the collectible thing, it's kind of moot to me anyway, because I don't make any money off the collectible market unless I'm signing for CGC. But if you buy a back issue of mine and you spend a lot of money on it, I don't see any of that. Not that I resent that or anything. That's the nature of the beast. But the collectability end of it doesn't matter to me. I'd rather have a good reprint than the original comic. Mostly because the reprint's going to cost me a lot less money and possibly be in better condition than the old comic I could afford. So but if you got the collecting bug, and I certainly understand the collecting bug from other hobbies I have, I dig it. I get it. Dara O'Sullivan, have you read All-Star Batman and Robin by Frank Miller and Jim Lee? I don't know about you, but after nearly 20 years, I'm still scratching my head over this series. I thought the art was sublime, but Miller's script is absolute proof that he clearly lost his comic book writing marbles. have you any insight into the genesis of this series and how the heck a Batman story that badly written ever saw the light of day? Well, it's largely because DC always looked upon Miller as a cash cow. If we can bring Frank Miller back to do this or do that, it'll be huge. And now we're going to combine him with Jim Lee, our most popular artist, and it's going to be, blockbuster sales, which I had, it was. I mean, it sold very well for DC. The problem is it's largely forgettable as a comic project. It's not something people are going to go back and reread over and over and over again. And Miller, I don't know that Miller really ever understood Batman. And certainly had no interest in writing the Batman who was featured in the monthly comics. He was writing his own version of Batman. And that continues here. And I think he said all he had to say about the character, and this was a payday. And it reads like a payday. And combining with Jim Lee, I mean, I just couldn't get very excited about it. Jim Lee is certainly very good, very accomplished, very popular, very successful artist. I just never saw Jim Lee over time evolving. The stuff just doesn't look fresh to me, the way that someone like Joe Kubert, who literally drew comics for over 50 years, his stuff always seemed fresh. Because Joe was Joe was still taking life drawing classes, in his final years, still learning, still trying, still exploring new stuff. And I don't think Jim Lee does a lot of that. And so you combine that with Miller's, indifferent, confusing script, and the end result is this. I know that DC's been disappointed over and over again by Miller, but they kept going back to him for a while. That return of the Dark Knight thing that he did in the 90s, late 90s, was a huge disappointment, and they spent a fortune on it. He was paid $1 million advance for that, based on drawings he did. He did a whole. I saw these in the office. I handled the originals. He did new portrait drawings of all the major Batman characters, and they were I'm going to admit, they were, quite frankly, the best artwork I'd ever seen Frank Miller do. That he put a lot of time into these things to close this $1 million deal, and then once he got it, just kind of phoned the whole thing in. It's a shame. It's a pity. I hate to dump on other freelancers. Other guys in the business, you know that I'm reticent to do that, but in this case, it's just an emperor has no clothes kind of situation. I think it was obvious to everybody that this wasn't the best project they could have put out there under the name All-Star Batman. And I guess the All-Star refers to the creators. But I'd rather have a story by a bunch of guys never heard of doing their best work than someone just sort of, going for the paycheck. If you have questions, comments, calling me out on some other freelancer, which I don't often respond to, you can contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com, with your questions, answers, suggestions, pictures of your kitty cats. And as mentioned before, Alpha Core still available. You can still get it. It's the crowdfunder's up to I think $1.2 million. But it's printed. It's available. You buy it, you'll have it in your hands within a week and a half. All the signed ones are gone. All the CGC ones are gone. Those people that have them all sealed up and never be able to read it, they bought them up by the thousands. And but it's still out there. It's still available from Rippaverse, and I will provide a link below. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for liking and subscribing and all the rest of it. And I will see all of you, I hope, down the road.